Welcome to JustB2B Leaders, a podcast where we are going to interview leaders from B2B companies that they are willing to generate a better business, more predictable and scalable through the transformation of their organizations. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us for this interview to Marco Bertini. Okay, Marco, tell me, who is Marco Bertini, and tell us about you.
Yeah, good morning. So, Marco Bertini, I'm Italian by birth. Grew up in Australia.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I grew up in 11 years in Melbourne. Then I lived in Spain, where I've came back to now. Also lived around in the US and the UK, so I moved around a fair bit.
So citizen of the world.
Kind of. Officially 2 passports, but pretty much lived in a lot of places. I am currently a professor at Esade, here at Esade. I've been here since 2014 via London Business School. I was a faculty member there before, and Harvard Business School. Just the last year and a half, I was a visiting professor over there.
Very good.
In some bit of spare time, I'm a senior advisor at BCG.
Very good. So when and where we meet each other, just to...
Yeah, we met each other, I was thinking in 2015-ish, right? At Esade, the year after I joined the school, I was walking in the corridor and the dean of the school stopped me and said, "Hey, I need you to do this job." So I couldn't escape. I was trying to get away from the side door, but I didn't get a chance. And so I was the head of the marketing unit. And of course, you're a professor, an esteemed professor in the marketing unit. So that's how we met.
Very good.
Struck a friendship.
Very, very good. In fact, this guy was crazy enough to nominate me to teaching awards.
Indeed.
And I remember because the text, when they communicate these kind of things, he has to justify why. And I think that you said in a more polite way, but mainly you said something like, this guy is just pushing so much for the B2B thing that with such level of energy, this was the word. Okay, very good. Yeah. So what are for you, I want that we talk about 2 topics that I think that you can really bring a lot of value to the people listening to us, which is what are the common mistakes. It's about price and your topic, which is outcomes. What are the common mistakes defining a price, and what are specifically the common mistakes defining a price in B2B?
So maybe just by way of background, right? I didn't say this before. I explained to you kind of where I've lived, but so what I do is since 2000. So I'm my degree is in behavioral economics, so I'm trained in economics and psychology, and since 2008, I've been really interested in prices because it's a number and it's very objective and nobody can argue what the number actually is, but it's very psychological. So I always find it very interesting how there's so much meaning behind the price. So in 2008, when I was in London, I developed a course. They became very popular, luckily, and it kind of grew over the years. And basically what I do, then I'll get into the question, but just to set the scene. What I do, I get students from all over the place. Usually they take my course as an elective course, so they've done the core course. And I tell them, right, you did marketing, right? And what's marketing all about? Well, marketing is about your customers, understanding them, finding what their needs are. And I said, great, you've learned that. How do we make money?
Out of that.
That's the question that I start the course with. And the course is really all about that. How do we, which is a lot about prices, but other things as well. How do we monetize our customer satisfaction? That's what the course is about, right?
Okay, very good.
Now, to your questions, so what are the challenges of companies when they try to do that, right? Well, funnily enough, it's forgetting the material they've done in the first year. That's what companies do, right? We hear about customer orientation, customer focus, and it's absolutely, I think it's absolutely right as a marketing prof. But it gets to a point when a company has to think about monetizing whatever they have, and they stop thinking about the customer, right? They start looking inside the company and say, Mr. Accountant, where are you? Oh yes, what are the costs? Okay. Financial controller, how much risk are we willing to tolerate? There's all these different internal considerations which we shouldn't forget about, but end up driving completely a decision about something that the customer has to pay.
So it's like a bottom-up
inside out.
P&L, inside out.
It's an inside-out sort of thing. So, that's what interests me. That's what I really sort of really push on in the very first session with my students. Like, you create value for a customer. The customer perceives a certain value from that particular product. Why you're not involving the customer in that decision? because that's a person that, or the company that has to pay you, right? So that's the number one.
And what is the answer?
Well, it's basically
from them. What is the answer from them?
The answer is completing it's a mentality thing, but also a research thing, and it's a different sort of thing. But the idea is you gotta take, if you think about a company and its customers, and you've got flows of value to customers and flows of values back to the company, all that loop has to be customer focused, right? Because your customers determine the potential for you to monetize. Nobody else does, right? And so that's kind of the idea. So you have to sort of make it much more outside in, involve the customers, whether it's through research or just even thinking about the differences that you have amongst customers. I mean, and there's much more detail around that.
And what is the students' reaction to the challenge of companies work like that? They work inside out. Why? What they tell you? What they think? Why this happens?
Depending on the seniority of the audience. So if it's a room full of executives, they'll go, yeah, that's what we do. Unfortunately, yeah. I'm sorry. If it's more junior students, like, why are companies doing that? It makes total sense. Like, what's going on, right? So then the question is, depending on the audience, is like explaining how, well, we tend to build our prices inside out because it feels safe. If this is my cost and I put a margin, I'm okay. I'm not going to be fired for that one, right? So that's pretty safe, right? And it's predictable, it's easy, there's simplicity in it, there's some benefits. But what you forget on the other side is just potential, pure market potential, right? So you're just leaving money on the table for sure, right? And so I don't know the answer, but at least when I work with companies, I try to push them to think about the trade-off. Do you like simplicity, a perceived safety, and all these things in exchange for, I don't know, X amount of revenue not coming to your bottom line? I mean, think about that trade-off and then make a decision.
So who is your main enemy when you come to this idea, with these ideas in a company? It must be finance. Who is more uncomfortable?
Finance on one end and sales folks usually. Sales folks say, "I don't worry, I'll do the price anyway. I know the customer. I'll do it, right?" And finance folks, no, but hey, the numbers have to. They start sweating profusely,
So probably this is one of the common mistakes defining a price.
So
doing
there is
inside out, right?
Yeah, it's the classic. I mean, and it's kind of classic. But then, of course, at least in the course that I do, we go. Once you peel that first layer of the onion, then there's a lot of things underneath it, right? That you have to do properly, right? Another one, you were asking me about big problems. Another one is assuming that a pricing decision is a zero-sum decision. That's a really big one. Right?
Assuming what?
It's a zero-sum decision, right? That I've created value, and now my price is my knife. I slice that value, and some of it is for you in terms of surplus, some of it is back for me in terms of profit, and that's it. That's a zero. So by definition, it's a zero-sum view, right? If I slice more this way, you take more. If I slice more that way, I take more, but you get less, right? And that's not true. It's totally not true, right? A lot of the things you do before you even set a price are really about managing your customers' expectations, managing your competitors' expectations, managing the risk in the transaction via competing on outcomes, for instance. There's a lot of things you can do before you even get to set a price that make the thing that I'm going to slice much, much bigger. At some point, I have to slice it. So at some point, it does become a zero-sum game. But if you think about it only as a zero-sum game, then most likely you left a lot of potential value right there on the table.
But it sounds like to do all this thing properly, you need a lot of information, right? Which
Correct.
is always there, or not?
Well, you absolutely. I mean, absolutely. So if I say to people, hey, your prices should be guided from the outside in, the very first thing you think about is, okay, I need to know about my customers, right? And then depending on who you are and your level of sophistication in your sector and all your context, then you can start saying to yourself, okay, do I want to go full on big, huge data set, mega algorithms, big investment with consulting companies that do conjoint studies, all that sort of stuff, or, which is incredibly useful, focus groups. Getting to know a more structured way of my salespeople talking to the customer. I mean, there's a whole gamut, a continuum of things you can do to understand your customer better that don't necessarily involve huge investments, huge amount of data. It could even just start from a structured way of thinking about the problem. Right?
Okay. Yeah. And specifically in B2B, what are the common mistakes you have seen?
Yeah, and then specifically in B2B, one of the big ones I think is assuming that value is just obvious to customers. So And I'm probably generalizing here, right? But at least in my experience with B2B customers, you've got this tendency to be very much inside what you do, right? Development of your products and your services. You're very much into it. You understand exactly how that works, and you understand the inside out. And then when it comes to, and a few of the people in this room here are from pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry is exactly like this, in my experience. You have a very technical way of talking about the things that you do, right? And so you kind of take it as an assumption that the customer will understand exactly what you're talking about, when often that is lost in translation. So when I was talking to you before about that pie getting bigger, before I slice it, if I don't make the effort of putting myself in the customer's shoes and talking about the things that I sell in a certain way, then the customer is just never going to expand the willingness to pay, not because they're trying to, fool you in some way. They're not strategic about it. It's just because they just don't understand, right? So I think number one, at least in my experience, has been kind of assuming that my stuff is great.
Yeah, very.
And you will understand that it's great.
Yeah. So very techie orientation, no? Product orientation.
Or self-fulfilling, but which is not, right? So that's kind of, that's one. I think another one, if I'm thinking.
Do you think could be related to the fact that in many cases B2B companies, they do complex things? It's a complex machine
so
or
in
a
psychology,
complex service.
So in psychology, there's a thing called the curse of knowledge. I don't know if you've heard this term before. It's a well-established phenomenon that when you know something, it's very hard to explain to somebody who doesn't know it. It's called the curse of knowledge, right? So the more technological, to your question, the more technological is your environment, the more your acronyms, your way of speaking becomes like that. And it's completely hard to empathize with a person who doesn't know those acronyms.
Okay.
So telecommunications, for instance, they just work by 3 letters all the time. It's ARP, these, and they all just work with those letters, and nobody understands exactly what they're saying. Pharmaceuticals are the same. Is very much the same story. The classic example is given of those in the medicines that you buy. You got these pamphlets, nobody understands.
And then the client will say, one day the client will say, people don't, these companies, they will say, the client don't get it.
Yeah.
They don't understand anything.
It goes, in my opinion, it goes over and above the thing that we all, I'm sure you talk about, I assume you talk about, is this issue of you have to show them the business case, right? You have to show them the business case. But it goes over and above that because every time I want to convince somebody about something, so it's about persuasion, I need to start more qualitative before I go into quantitative. It's just the human nature.
Absolutely.
Start with, right?
Yeah.
And then when you start with qualitative, it's literally can be as simple as visuals that help people understand that what I'm selling you actually provides you all sorts of benefits along the line. So visuals, ways of talking about things before you get that famous business case.
In the B2B management program at Esade, one of the mantras that we share is that in B2B we sell contextual value.
Yeah.
Understanding or not understanding the context of a client will help you to really defend a value that fits with the context or not. Yeah. And what you're saying, it's what you're saying, that you see that it's a problem in B2B company. It's killing this concept. If you fall in love with your own products, with your own acronyms, you will never focus on the context of the client. So it's a problem of CEO mindset or mindset of the company, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things, I've been doing this 17 years, I don't know, or thereabouts. And it's funny because my students, when I tell them this, my students say, that can't be, right? It's like, it makes sense, right? And it still surprises me. I go, and I've had this experience just a month ago with a client of mine in the B2B space. And they've been at it for many, many years. It's a very old company, and they still struggle to think about what they do from the perspective of the customer. So there's something inherently difficult about that, whether it's psychological, whether it's structural, whether it is that stops them from doing it. In fact, so whenever they call me to help them, because I'm supposedly a pricing guy, the first thing I do with them is explain to me what you sell. What is that value you create in the first place, so that I can then monetize it, right? And it's a struggle.
It's harder in Asia, in Europe, or in Americas. What is your?
That's a good question.
You've been teaching everywhere.
Yeah, I've been teaching teaching or working with clients.
Depending if you're teaching executives, at the end of the day, it's what is your sense
Well,
of when you talk to an American? It's something that
God,
they
I don't
are more
wanna,
value.
I'm gonna get myself in trouble if I start generalizing. No, look. Oh my God, I'm really gonna get myself into trouble. So
I tell you my own opinion,
Yeah.
which I will not get in trouble. I think that Americans, they are more value oriented because they prefer to fight on that. Europeans, we are very, very operations oriented and product oriented. If the product is good, this will be sold. And Asians, it depends. It really depends on how the company has been infected by other cultures and affected by other way of thinking. But
I can see a little bit of that. In my experience in U.S. companies, there is here's another thing though. It's okay. So with U.S. companies, so this is another thing. I think it's true that in the U.S.-ish Anglo-Saxon type companies, there is more of a emphasis on value, but there is also a really big misconception as to what value actually is. So one thing is acknowledging and talking about it. One thing is understanding, because value comes in 3 flavors, and people understand this. We talk about value like it's this word that we use all the time, but we actually don't know what it means. Value comes in 3 flavors. There is the value that customers pay, which is what you take home, part of that. There is value customers see themselves, which is bigger than this one, but there's always a gap. And there's a value they actually get.
Yeah.
All right. There's what they get, what they see, and what they pay.
This is something we describe.
And when these 3 things don't match, right? So when we talk about value, we have to be very careful, because actually knowing these 3 things allow you, and sorry for getting technical, or you maybe, it allows you to calibrate, right? Because if I know people get a lot, they see little, and are willing to pay even less, then it's not a pricing problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to deal with this. I have to get this guy to go over here and that one to go over there, right? To move along. And so it gives you calibration. It tells you where to look for.
My feeling with that is that concepts are the same for B2B and B2C. Totally agree. Complexity of gathering the right information to do it properly in B2C is super complicated, and in B2B is super easy. I mean, because you have one-to-one relationships. It depends on your process, your people, your behavior, what you do in front of a client. Really doing a good job in B2C on those concepts that you share, which are, I think, I'm 1000% agree, is the same for B2B. It's super. It has to be super hard to do it for defining the price of the iPhone.
Each world has its own nuances, right? With B2C, you've got huge sample sizes.
Yeah.
So statistically, you can be correct, but also you got huge variance. Everybody's very different in a room, and so you have to, if you want to do a good job at pricing, you have to cater to those differences. You can't have a single price for everybody, right? So somehow you have to have a different price. And then in B2B, you've got a smaller sample size, which is great in terms of like simplicity, but then afterwards, of course, you have more bias. For many given data observation points, it's going to be more. It has more weight, so it has more bias, right? So, but I totally see it. But the fundamentals, I think, as you were saying, and I really push this on my students, the fundamentals are exactly the same. The way to think about the problem is exactly the same. Then, of course, the devil, as they say, is in the detail. And when you land in a B2B context, you've got all these contexts you have to look after. When you go to B2C, you have to go all these other contexts. But they can still learn from each other, right?
Super cool. So what would be your top 3 advice that you would give to a B2B leader about defining properly a price policy in a B2B company?
I need to go back to some of the things that I think I was saying before. Number 1 would be understand value for all its different flavors, what you get, what you see, and what you pay. That's key to me, right? Because that's what determines my ability to make my transaction with a customer as monetizable as possible. Then if I decide to monetize it or not, it depends on my company objectives and a lot of things. That's a different story. But the potential is real. So that's number 1. Number 2 would be, again, back to what I was saying before, never take value as assumed. Look at my stuff, it's great. For sure you're going to pay for it. I mean, no, you have to really put yourself in the shoes assuming
of the customer. Is, right? Assuming is to make an ass.
Yes, I didn't hear that one before. Number three, I think is this is something that you mentioned before. There's a feedback loop, all right? So I've talked about sort of create value and take some of that back for yourself. But when you take some of it back for yourself, there's a feedback loop, right? The decisions that you make as a company in terms of the way you price has an impact on the marketplace in terms of the selection of customers that you get. You price in a certain way, you're more appealing to these customers and less appealing to others. Well, those customers will behave are of a certain type. They will mix with your own employees in a certain way. The most immediate is the Salesforce interaction, and that can create morale problems, incentive problems, challenges creates friction in your organization.
Yeah.
The way you price creates certain perceptions, right? If I price at a certain level in a certain way, some people learn about
Absolutely.
me. Must be high quality. You're very complicated. What are you hiding from me? All these sort of things. And then it creates actions, right? If I set prices in a certain way, people behave to try and get the best deals they can, right? So I can move customers around. So all of those three things change your demand curve. So demand tomorrow is shaped by the prices today.
You just said something that I always share, and I'm never sure if people get it, which is your clients, they are an incredible intellectual opportunity. So if you work with the right companies, this is going to be an incredible source of intelligence that will improve your company. But if you work upside down, if it's arrogant, my products are those, this is my price, you will learn nothing. It's self.
It's whatever it is. Self. Yeah. It's self something. Yes.
It's self something.
I agree. No, and again, these feedback loops are often missed because, I mean, clearly we want to sell. Fine, but hey, so at some point you might be in a luxury position to say, I prefer to sell here, because then it creates certain feedback that might be useful to my business.
You know something I've been doing for the last years, and people who listens me and follows me, they probably have seen the evolution. I removed the word sell, and I don't think we want to sell. I think we want to make business. Which is something that is probably not the same, right? It's like selling is like the last mile. Business is the full enchilada, right?
I see
is the full enchilada. So
there's
sometimes
a connotation with it.
There is a connotation, right? It's like we making business means working with the people you want, that really enjoy. There is a fit, a cultural fit, a value fit, and so on, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I have in my world I have the same issues. If people ask me what do you do, and if I say pricing, there's a certain connotation with it. It's very tactical, very last mile. Very like, give me the Excel spreadsheet, let's figure out what it is. If I say monetization, it's a different story. It's really about how do I think about whatever value I created, and because some of the things I might do have nothing to do with prices, might be a business model.
And I'm sure somebody will come back to you say, so you do price, right?
You
do the effort to explain. No, I'm doing something wider, right? Okay, very good, super. So, and then you bring over the table this concept of the outcome-based pricing.
Correct.
What is that? How do you make a...
So back to what we just said. Every price has two things. There's a numerator, which is a number, and a denominator. The denominator answers the question, where are you going to put your money? What are you going to put your money on, right? And so traditionally that's been a product or a service, right? But it doesn't have to be the case, right? I could be selling access to something, so you pay me by time. The unit of payment is time. I could be selling you usage, so the unit of payment is an actual consumption episode, or all the way to the right, the unit of payment could be a performance indicator, some sort of metric, right? So that's what we call competing on outcomes, right? Deciding, irrespective of what number I put up here, the way that I decided to generate revenue is as a function of the outcomes that I've delivered, the use that I've delivered, or the access that I've delivered, as opposed to the things that I make.
Wow, and this is doable in B2C?
Yeah, absolutely. There are certain conditions that have to be fulfilled. But
do you have a simple example?
Insurance? As long as you can measure, so as long as you can measure stuff beyond the moment of purchase, whether it's B2B, B2C, after the moment of purchase, if I can measure what happens to it afterwards, then I can put a price on it. So with insurance, right, I can measure with sensors, I can measure how the way you drive over here. If you drive well, if you drive fast because you were late, or and this is what's happening now. The insurance is moving all towards usage-based. They call it usage-based, but it's actually a performance-based model, where you price as a function of the way you the way you drive, certain indicators of driving behavior.
Okay. So you mean when an insurance company is forcing you in Singapore to put a camera in your car, and if you don't have a camera, you will not be covered?
Well, no. There's different ways of doing it. That's a pretty harsh way of doing it. The standard way right now is, hey, here's this option. I think we could save you money if you're a good driver because you've been paying for the other guys to drive too fast. So why don't you put this sensor in, and we'll guarantee you a certain reduction in your thing. Or education, since we're in this space, right? Education is going through a huge revolution, right? Because all of a sudden you can start thinking about not charging for classes, for courses, for textbooks, for whatever, but starting charging for learning outcomes. Because the technology around measuring learning outcomes has improved a lot. I work with Pearson Education for like 8 years. 8 years. Developing sort of a model for this. A lot of folks here from pharma and health, in the health industry. This is kind of, in a way, this is what's happening also about this idea of value-based healthcare. It's all about understanding health outcomes and trying to orient my business model, if possible, that way.
Very good. Yeah. So what are the key benefits that you see implementing this outcome-based philosophy?
Yeah, so pushing yourself, you don't have to go all the way to outcome, because that's difficult, right? But it depends on your context again. But pushing yourself away from pricing a product, that's good enough for me. What happens? You align yourself more with the customer, right? Because your customer, we all know it, wants to buy the hole in the wall, doesn't want to buy the drill, right? We all heard that many, many times, right? But it's true. The guy wants to buy the hole in the wall, right? So if I move my payment from drill to hole in the wall, right? I take risk off the shoulders of the customer, and I put them on my shoulders.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
More on that in a second, right?
Yeah.
We can talk about that in a second.
So
when I do that, what happens?
The moment you talk about the job to be done, you are taking the risk, and then you need to deliver.
The moment I make money on the job to be done, I can talk about it as much as you want, but if I don't make money off it, it's cheap talk, right? The moment I do that, then I take some of that risk on, and then you should see a couple of things. You should see an expansion in CLV. Acquisition from customers who like to be risk averse, growth of existing customers who improve your business, or higher willingness to pay, or retention. Right?
CLV for
customer
whoever.
lifetime value. Sorry.
Okay,
so
lifetime value.
It's in
Okay.
my mind. 2, it's a really good signal. If you've got a better drill than the competitor, good luck the other guy doing hole-based pricing. No, I mean they're gonna lose money, right? So if you got a better drill, I mean you kind of should do it, right? And it's a good signal inside. If you are Pearson and you say, I'm the world's leading learning company, that's my purpose. Well, no, my purpose is I want to change people through learning, something along those lines. And then your employees see that you make money off books. You're not putting your money where your mouth is. So that's why it's an internal signal as well, that you stand behind your purpose, right? If that is your purpose. And then 3 will be, more longer term, it's more protection from disruption, right? Because whenever you see a new company coming in, this is more for the B2C world, I think. Whenever you see a new company coming in, they're always offering a less riskier deal to the customers. It's always like that. They always move along the way. So if you can protect yourself as an incumbent, it's good.
What is the footprint of that? What is the person? If you have I know that there is no real data, but what is the percentage of companies around the world that they consider those concepts in their?
Actually, huge, right? Because
huge
because you've got. Let's think about all the options: product,
outcome-based philosophy,
access, use, performance. Performance, little.
Okay.
It's coming.
Okay.
In fact, B2B is actually leading the way in that sense. Usage, quite a bit. Subscription, well, you know it. Access is subscription, you see it everywhere. So along in that journey, it's happening a lot. And it's really a function of, there's a few things you have to get it right to make the transition all the way to the right, to that end, right? But along the line, you see lots and lots and lots of companies.
Yeah, so much more coming from companies with a very, very, very hard product culture.
Correct.
Which is they fall in love to talk about the drill instead about the hole.
Exactly. So for me, when I say to my clients, my students, hey, competing on outcomes, I don't say when you go back to work tomorrow, you have to price like this. No, I say the way you're pricing right now is probably not the best. So think about moving away from it. Whatever you're allowed, no matter how far you're allowed to go, try to push it and keep thinking about more.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking two things, right? I think it's easier in B2B than in B2C. It's technically easier. I think it's the same concepts. I agree. Same. But what I really see is a very complicated change management process internally for executives to accept that we could consider to work on that.
Yeah, there's a few.
So
I think your assessment is probably spot on. There's a few things you have to get right, and I think it connects back to the things we were saying before as well. The very first thing you got to get it right. Back to this idea that you have to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. You got to start thinking about outcomes. I'm saying the same thing basically, right? You got to start thinking about, okay, what is the outcome which then makes you you think it's easy, but then it starts making you think, well, who's my customer? Okay, wait, and how many outcomes does this customer have, and how do I measure them? And can the customer change the measurement? So then so there's a whole. It's quite challenging to think just about that. Then you have to get the data, and this is really important for B2B, and most people forget this. You have to control the outcome. You have to.
Yeah.
The outcome is a function usually of me and the customer and some other people in the ecosystem.
And the outcome is whatever the client is going to share with third party.
That's part of the
Somehow.
control. That's part of the control.
Yeah.
So I can't say I'm going to make money off holes if I don't observe holes, if I don't actually drill them myself, perhaps. You know what I mean? It's like there's a bit of it. You don't want to be too. You cannot take a risk that you cannot manage on your shoulders, right? So you have to have certain control over those outcomes.
I recommend you take a look to Marco's book, and my first reaction to Marco's book, which the title is
The Ends Game.
The Ends Game. Mm-hmm. You have a stamp there in the which is saying from healthcare to health or something like that. And I was thinking, okay, I think I get the point. You don't want an insurance for health. You want health. You want a better health.
You don't want education. You want learning, right?
You want learning. You don't want education. Very, very, very good. Very powerful. So what are for you the key challenges from moving to the pricing mindset, way of thinking, way of working, and so on, to the outcome-based?
Well, we talked about already this idea of understanding outcomes and thinking about from the outcomes in. We discussed that already. The data are not to what extent we discussed, but if we have to think about what's happening after the purchase, I have to measure it. So there has to be some sort of, we call this impact data in the book, right? The impact of the things that you do. So you have to be able to measure that. There is the control, and you mentioned something that is maybe even at the top of this list, is managing the transition.
Claro.
This swallowing the fish, they call this in Silicon
Change
Valley.
management.
I don't know if you've ever heard that term, right? I mean, I don't know, for the folks maybe listening don't know this term. The swallowing the fish idea is, your revenue is going to go down at the beginning because you're pushing money in the future. So that's the bottom of the fish, right? Hopefully it goes up. And the top of the fish is your costs. They go up at the beginning because you're changing everything. And then hopefully it comes down. Hopefully they cross again, which is the tail of the fish, right? And you swallow the whole fish.
I come from the software business. So at the end of the day, it's like when we are moving from on-premise to cloud, on-premise is upfront money. Cloud is you need to offer value every day, because if you don't offer value every day, they stop paying on a daily basis. So we have an incredible churn. So it's a huge pressure. It really affects to your business model. That's right. Very, very good. So what do you think that B2B can learn from B2C? I'm always challenging and trying to make and pushing for B2B is different.
Sure.
But
here's one thing. What can B2B learn from B2C, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's one thing. Don't be afraid of technology. In the sense that, at least this goes only to, this is my experience, right? So as far as it's generalizable to others, I think it is, but take it with a grain of salt, right? So in B2C, because we have huge sample sizes, and you think, I'm going to throw this algorithm at it, I'm going to have this dynamic pricing engine. You can do dynamic pricing in B2B. Totally.
Even the sample
you can use smaller. You can adjust for those things. You can use algorithms perfectly fine in B2B. So there's a lot of technology you can throw at a problem that, in my opinion, hasn't been used as much in the B2B context. And sometimes the excuses are, we have few customers, it's this, it's that, when actually there's science advances, there is ways around any of those structural issues. So number one, I think by far, do not be afraid of technology. B2C has jumped right in, and B2B is somewhat lagging, again, generally speaking.
So you mean because B2C, it treats a bigger sample of you are more you work normally with different type of technology to play with tests, and because we manage less amount of clients, we are less we don't do it so much. And you're saying that why not, right? It's
exactly.
who cares?
It's a misconception that a small sample stops you technologically.
That's a good point.
Or that you can do. You can use technology for transparency. There's a lot of things, and I'm not saying there is no technology used in B2B. Clearly, that's not what I'm saying. But in my world, vis-a-vis B2C, there's a big gap, right? And what happens though that the providers of technology typically start for whatever reason from a B2C angle, and then when they get enough push from the B2B, they start adapting their software and their products to the B2B. But they exist, they're there, right? And so I would like to see more adoption.
Very good. Marco, man, thank you very much.
Of course.
It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening.